Okay, let's dive into the brilliant and, turbulent world of Sylvia Plath. We're talking about a poet whose art and personal anguish were completely intertwined. You just can't separate them. She was a writer who took her own inner demons and turned them into some of the most powerful poetry of the 20th century. So we're going to explore how the biggest pains in her life actually fueled her greatest work.
Plath asked this haunting question just a year before she died. And wow, it just gets right to the heart of her life's biggest struggle, doesn't it? This feeling of being totally trapped inside her own head. This wasn't just some pretty poetic line. For her, it was a real, desperate question, looking for an escape from a storm inside her that just would not quit.
And that brings us to her most famous metaphor from her novel, The Bell Jar. I want you to just imagine being sealed under a huge glass jar. You can see the world happening out there, but you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't connect with it. The air inside is stale and everything's distorted. That's how Plath described her depression, a suffocating, paralyzing isolation that just cuts you off from life itself.
But you have to understand, this feeling, this bell jar, it wasn't just a case of the blues or feeling sad. For Plath, it was a severe clinical mental illness that she fought pretty much her whole life, starting from when she was young. And that fight would end up defining everything, her life and her art.
So picture this. She's a brilliant, straight-A student at Smith College, and the pressure to be perfect is just immense. Then, after a summer internship in New York City, the bell jar came down hard. She had a complete breakdown, attempted suicide, and ended up in a hospital. And there, she was given electroshock therapy, a truly terrifying experience that she would later channel all that pain and fear right into the pages of the bell jar.
So what did she do with all that pain? Well, she became a pioneer of this new style of writing called confessional poetry. See, instead of hiding her struggles, she put them right there on the page for everyone to see. She took all the stuff nobody wanted to talk about back then, mental illness, shame, anger, family secrets, and she turned it all into this incredibly powerful art. She gave a voice to feelings that so many people had but were too afraid to ever say out loud.
Now, if we really want to understand where Plath's pain comes from, we have to go back to the first major trauma of her life, losing her father, Otto Plath. His death would cast this huge shadow that she would live under for the rest of her life. She was only 8 years old, just a kid. Her dad, he was a well-respected professor who actually studied bees, and he refused to get treatment for his diabetes until it was just too late. For Sylvia, his death wasn't just a loss. To her, it felt like he had deliberately abandoned her, a deep betrayal that would haunt her forever. After he died, something happened in her mind. Otto Plath wasn't just a memory anymore. He became this huge mythical figure, a giant, a ghost that she could never, ever escape. And this unresolved, complicated relationship became one of the central obsessions in her writing. And the way she wrote about it, whoa, it was shocking. In her most famous poem, Daddy, she used this really brutal imagery, comparing her father to a Nazi. Now, she wasn't saying he was literally a Nazi. It was a metaphor. It was her way of trying to explain just how massive, how frightening, and how completely suffocating his memory felt inside her head, like a darkness so total that no light could get through. Okay, so the next major person in her story is her mother, Aurelia. After her husband died, Aurelia worked incredibly hard to provide for her kids, and she poured all of her hopes and dreams into Sylvia's success. And you can imagine the kind of unspoken pressure that put on Sylvia, right? This need to be absolutely flawless. So what you end up with is this huge split in her life. On the outside, she wore this mask of perfection. You know, the straight A's, all the writing prizes, the perfect smile. She felt like this was the only way she could ever repay her mother for all her sacrifices. But underneath that mask, that's where the bell jar was.
All that crushing pressure led to a paralyzing fear of failure and hid this really deep inner sadness. Then, in 1956, Plath meets someone who is just as intense and brilliant as she is. The dark, handsome English poet Ted Hughes. And their relationship, it would go down in history as one of the most passionate and destructive literary love stories ever. I mean, their first meeting was the stuff of legend. She sought him out at a party, recited his own poems back to him, and then, in this moment of raw passion, she bit him on the cheek, hard enough to draw blood. They were married just 4 months later, and for a while, they were the literary power couple. But then, in 1962, Hughes had an affair with a woman named Assia Wivel, and it shattered their world. And in those lonely, angry months that came after, Plath, all by herself, produced the most brilliant and explosive work of her entire life. It's like the heartbreak just unlocked something fierce inside of her. She actually called it a blood jet of poetry. That pain, as awful as it was, became the fuel for her artistic fire. It just stripped away any masks she had left and let her write with a raw, terrifying honesty she'd never been able to touch before. So the last few months of Plath's life are a real paradox. It was a time of unimaginable personal suffering, but at the exact same time, it was a moment of her greatest artistic triumph. And her tragic end would eventually be overshadowed by the incredible, immortal power of her words. During one of the coldest winters London had ever seen, alone with her 2 small children, and in the depths of another severe depression, Sylvia Plath took her own life. She was only 30 years old. Just a tragic, devastating end to such a brilliant and troubled life. But that is not where her story ends. Not even close. In 1982, almost 20 years after she died, her life's work, The Collected Poems, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, think about that. One of the highest honors in all of literature. The voice that was silenced had finally and powerfully been heard. And just to put into perspective how huge that was, she became the first person ever to win the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry after their death. The first and only one. Her victory was completely unprecedented. It was proof that her work was just so powerful, it could not be ignored. So what's her real legacy? I think it's about freedom. She ripped the mask off of private suffering. Her raw, confessional poetry broke down walls and basically taught generations of writers and readers that it's not just okay, but it's necessary to talk about our pain, our anger, and all of our deepest vulnerabilities. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question. When you look at a life like Sylvia Plath's, where such incredible art came from such incredible suffering, it really makes you wonder, can that kind of powerful, timeless art really come from anywhere else but the fire?